The day I pulled up to the lake, I expected to hear the soft sounds of the woods, the birds, the wind in the pines, maybe the ripple of water against the dock. Instead, I heard the low, ugly hum of a diesel engine and smelled hot metal. My heart sank before I even saw it. And when I stepped past the tree line, my knees nearly buckled my cabin, the last place I ever sat with my wife before she passed the place my daughter felt safe after her accident was nothing but a pile of broken boards and shattered glass. Standing over the wreckage like a queen surveying her conquest was the HOA president, Mara Brigsby, with that smug smile plastered on her face. She called it a community upgrade. I called it erasing 80 years of my family's history. Then she had the audacity to hand me a fine for trespassing on my own damn land. I wanted to scream, but I'd learned long ago first man to lose his temper loses the fight. So I clenched my fists, swallowed that fire, and walked away. But believe me, that wasn't surrender, it was just the start. The truth is, I never wanted much from anyone. My name's Jack Leland. I'm a retired Marine pushing my 50s, and that old cabin by the lake wasn't just a building. It was the heart of my family. My grandfather built it, my father repaired it, I raised my daughter there. It was where Sarah, my wife, and I shared our last sunset together before she got too sick. You don't bulldoze memories like that. But HOA presidents like Mara don't care about memories. They care about control. And Mara, she treated that clipboard of hers like it was the Constitution itself. She claimed my cabin was unpermitted, that the area was floodplain, that the new community pavilion would serve everyone better. She rattled off regulation numbers like she was reading the weather, dismissing me with a tilt of her head like I was a stubborn child. I left there feeling like a ghost on my own property. I drove straight to the county records office, hoping it was some kind of mistake. Sat in that ugly plastic chair while the clerk tapped away glasses slipping down his nose. When he finally turned the screen around, I felt the air go out of my lungs. According to their amendment, my plot had been absorbed by the HOA months ago under some easement reclassification. A loophole, pure and simple. It didn't matter that my family had owned it for 80 years. On paper, I was nothing but a non-resident plot holder. Walking out of that office, the sun felt harsh, punishing. For the first time, I realized this wasn't an error, it was an execution, and I was the target. Over the next week, the harassment began. Envelopes arrived daily. $500 for abandoned structure cleanup, $1,000 for harassment of board members, $14,000 for failure to maintain property. They even doubled the fines just to bleed me out. Neighbors who used to wave now looked away, afraid of being seen talking to me. One whispered at the post office that Mara was telling everyone I was a squatter, that I was extorting the community. They weren't just stealing my land, they were trying to poison my name. That night, my daughter called. Her voice was small, worried. "Dad, please, just let it go. It's not worth it. It's just a cabin. Just a cabin." I stared at the photo on my desk, her and Sarah smiling on that porch swing, and for a moment I almost gave in. Maybe I was too stubborn. Maybe I couldn't win against an entire HOA. Maybe they were bigger than me. For the first time since coming back from the service, I felt beaten, bone-deep tired. I drove to the lake one last time, sat on a folding chair at the overlook, watched them pour concrete where my cabin used to stand. It looked so permanent, like they'd erased me for good, and I whispered to myself, maybe my daughter's right. Maybe it's time to pack it in. But when I got home, I started boxing up the old documents my grandfather had kept. And at the very bottom of that strongbox, under a false liner I never knew was there, I found it a developer's agreement, crisp and recent. Buried in the addendums was a transfer of assets. And there, in black and white, I saw the name Lakeside Holdings, LLC. My company. The dormant LLC I'd set up years ago for my contracting work. Turns out the developer who cashed out had transferred the entire land lease of the subdivision to me. It hit me like a bolt of lightning. Mara thought she'd bulldozed some sad old man's shack. She had no idea she'd just picked a fight with her landlord. I didn't sleep that night. I called an old friend the next morning, Dina Morales, one of the toughest land use attorneys in the state. I laid every paper on her table. My grandfather's deed, the leaseback agreement, the transfer. She read in silence, then leaned back, grinning. Jack, you didn't come here to beg. You came here to drop a bomb. So we reactivated the LLC, filed the quiet title, and waited. I started attending HOA meetings, sitting in the back row with a thermos of coffee, saying nothing. Mara would falter mid-sentence when her eyes landed on me. My silence rattled her more than any shouting could. She tried to double the fines, plastered my photo under trespasser alert, even sent her wannabe cop security chief Rick Tanner to block me from the road. I just looked him dead in the eye, then drove away without a word. When the quiet title came through, we made our first move. Dana sent a certified letter the HOA had been in default of its master lease for 18 months. They owed 6 figures in back rent or face eviction. Predictably, Mara's lawyer laughed it off, said they'd reclassify the land and crush me. He smirked, slid the letter back across the table, told me to pay my fines and maybe the board would be lenient. I walked out, silent fists bleeding from gripping the steering wheel later. He thought this was a game of checkers, but I was playing chess. So we pulled the pin. Dina filed the lease termination clause, 60 days notice, ironclad. We served Mara at her house, her lawyer at his office, and filed with the county clerk. It was the nuclear option. And the fuse was lit. Mara panicked. She went on the local news calling me a fraud, a scammer. Sent out mass emails painting me as a villain. But I knew whoever controls the story wins. So I recorded a simple video in my workshop, no suit, no podium. I held up my grandfather's map, the lease agreement, the certified letters they ignored. And I looked right into the camera. They bulldozed my family's cabin because they thought I was powerless. But the rule is simple. You don't take what isn't yours. The community exploded. Neighbors shared it, asked questions Mara had never answered. And then Ed Mallory, a former board member, commented publicly, "He's telling the truth." That was the crack in the dam. Others poured in with their own stories of fines and threats. The tide turned. So I called for a town hall. The only space big enough was the half-finished pavilion they'd built over my cabin. Perfect. That night the room was packed. Mara strutted to the podium with her lawyer and Rick standing guard. She tried to open with forced cheer, but I cut her off. "With all due respect, Mara, this isn't your meeting, it's mine." I clicked the projector, and the wall lit up with my grandfather's map. I walked the room through everything: lease terms, years of non-payment, the eviction notice. I pointed to the steel beams around us. They didn't just destroy my cabin. They gambled with your homes. They built this monument to themselves on land they didn't own. The room erupted, people shouting about their own fines, their harassment. Mara shrieked, called me a liar, claimed I forged documents. I laid 2 papers on the table in front of her, the cease and desist she sent me, and the eviction notice ending her reign. The crowd turned. Shouts became demands. A vote was called right then and there. And in front of 100 cell phone cameras, Mara Brigsby was stripped of her title, dethroned in the very building she stole to build. That's where it ended. Mara went from barking orders to screaming as deputies hauled her out days later, caught on camera breaking into my tool shed with a crowbar trying to find the real papers. The look on her face when the sheriff told her she was under arrest for trespassing, that was justice. And that's the story of how the HOA bulldozed my cabin and how their queen fell on her own sword. You want a lesson from this simple. Bullies think rules don't apply to them until you remind them whose ground they're standing on.